When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say, because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. They told me the village should not exist. It sits like a bruise on the map. No roads that lead to it deliberately, no signposts, only a river that forgets its own name, and a mountain that leans away as if ashamed. People who studied maps in cities and made fortunes selling guides and safe routes would shake their heads when I asked. No such village, they would say. There are only ruins. Yet the bus took me there, slow and coughing, the driver a man whose teeth had a habit of disappearing when he smiled. He dropped me at a bend in the road at dusk, where the air was already tasting of wet paper and wood smoke. A thin woman lit a lamp and watched me from a doorway, like someone measuring a life. Her eyes told me nothing, not the shape of welcome, not the shape of warning, only that the inside of her house kept its own ledger. I was not there for ghost stories. I was there because curiosity is a quiet, hungry voice in me that will not be denied. I was there because a scholar I trusted, an elderly man who kept his books like talismans, had sent me a single line of instruction: visit the temple that does not honor a god. Bring respect, not pity. Respect, not pity, is a strange thing to offer anyone who keeps a candle for a demon. It is stranger still to obey such a direction. And yet, with a notebook in my pocket and the thin arrogance of someone who believes in explanations, I walked toward the lantern-lit lane until the village swallowed the world behind me. This is what I found, and what I failed to understand. This is my attempt to set the details straight, because sometimes the outline of terror matters more than the terror itself. If these words reach you, listen as one would listen to a river after it has gone quiet. For in the hush, things remember things they have promised to forget. I arrived the night the rain learned how to speak. It came in thin, patient threads that tapped like the first fingers of someone attempting a door, and the village answered with a hush so complete it made the lamp flames seem insolent. My notebook lay unused in my hands. Words felt presumptuous in a place where silence kept appointments. The temple sat at the heart of the village, not at the top of a hill or beneath a fig tree as most temples choose for ceremony, but pressed between two ordinary houses like a secret someone had tried to hide on purpose. Its roof was low and shingled with old tiles that sighed when the wind lifted a page of memory. A stone path, worn flat by feet who do not count days, led to a single wooden door carved with no gods I recognized. Only a face, perhaps molded from a child's clay dream gone wrong, wide eyes, a mouth that had learned to sing in wrong keys, and a line of scratches down one cheek as if time had attempted to tally. Near the entrance, villagers had left offerings not of fruit and incense alone, but of small, cracked things, miniature clay dolls, a shoe with its laces tied in a knot that said stay, a scallop shell with a smear of ash. At first I thought the objects were gifts of poverty, until I noticed how meticulously each lay, as if someone invisible had laid them down with particular hands. A boy with pocked cheeks stood nearby, staring at the temple as if he wanted to measure its breadth. He did not flinch when I passed. His eyes held a ledger of small fears. The keeper of the temple came to meet me. He was a man who had folded himself small enough to live inside the temple's shadow. His hair was thinner than a memory, and his robes had the look of something stitched out of old prayers. He offered me tea that smelled of root and rust and the heavy flavor of long days. The tea warmed my hands and then my questions. I told him my purpose, an outsider's voice, practiced and polite, and he listened as if he were keeping time for a clock that preferred bone to brass. "You are not of the line," he said finally. "You do not carry the mark." He tapped my palm as if seeking a symbol I might have forgotten. I stared at his motion as if a trick had shown itself. "Then why come?" he asked. "To see," I said. It was not a brave answer. It was honest. I have never been good at lies meant to be soft. He nodded in a way that indicated the end of answers. "You will see, but seeing is not the same as returning." That phrase haunted me more than anything in the village. Each night I woke to it in the corner of my mind like an uninvited guest. I walked the lanes listening to the rhythm of life, wooden clogs on cobblestone, the distant scrape of a cart, the shout of someone who had found a fish too big for the pot to handle. The houses leaned into one another in small conspiracies, and children played a game of shadows that made the walls feel like living things. The villagers were not cruel. They were astonishingly a community that had been taught to keep one eye on the sky and the other on the well. On the third morning I met the foreigner. He had the look of people who have been told stories as entertainment and have learned to treat every tale as a map. He introduced himself in a halting but eager Mandarin, his accent catching on the wrong syllables like a child mispronouncing a name. He told me he was here to study. Anthropology, he said, though his eyes were the kind that collected the world like specimens. He had come by way of curiosity and cheap flights, and he laughed at the notion that the villagers' warnings might be anything more than ritual eccentricity. He wore a bracelet of small, foreign beads and carried a camera the size of someone's breakfast. He asked the keeper questions that were precise as circlets, and the keeper answered with words that were slow as knives. The foreigner pinned a badge to his chest that announced his intent. Researcher, we assumed. That night he drank too much tea, or perhaps it was the air, but his laugh grew larger and more foolish. "I'll write a paper," he told anyone who would listen. "I'll title it Ritual and Survival in Remote Cultures. People will pay to read this." When he left the common house late, I heard the boy with the pockmarks say, "Don't go past the well." The foreigner shrugged. "No well is dangerous." He stepped toward the stone mouth of the village well, as a dog steps toward the scent of food. The well had a low fence around it and a rope that hung like a deliberate throat. An old sign warned in characters that had almost worn away. "Speak not the name, Sunam." The foreigner, for reasons humans give when they want to feel brave, bent and cupped his hands and dropped a coin, humming a tune he probably thought charming. The sound the coin made was small and certain, a final punctuation. The foreigner laughed. Later, when the moon hung like a nail in the sky, the boy came to me. His face had gone thinner, as if something had been taken. He took off his shoes at the well, he said, and hummed a tune I don't know. They found his shoes on the path in the morning, but not him. They found him at the edge of the rice fields, near the reeds that made soft maps of the wind. His footprints stopped as if someone had lifted the page. They said he had been looking at the sky in a way that made his neck look wrong. There was no blood. There was nothing dramatic that would satisfy a proper headline. Just a body folded in the manner of someone who had finally decided to sleep. The keeper told me the right time to leave is before the first thunder, after a stranger arrives. "The demon is patient," he said, wrapping his palms into mine with a gentleness that was almost ceremonial. "It does not need hurry. It prefers debts paid in good time." Later, beneath the lamp that smelled of root and rust, I opened my notebook, and for the first time the lines felt too thin for the shape of the night. I wrote, hand trembling slightly, the foreigner's name. It looked ordinary on paper and terribly heavy in my mouth. I tried to get the villagers to tell me the story plainly. They offered me variations like a child offering the same broken toy in exchange for patience. One said the demon was once a god who had grown lonely and sharp. Another said the village had found the demon in the mountain and made it a promise, and promises in the dark are heavy. An elder who smelled of camphor and centuries said, "He was not meant to be worshipped. He is not your friend. He is a debt you should never take casually." The more I asked, the more the accounts arranged themselves into a pattern I could not trust. The demon liked the sound of things, particularly human voices sung into the dark. It liked the shape of lost people. It kept a ledger not of names but of looks, glances stolen from faces when their owners were careless. It did not crave violence but attention, the small, repetitive recognitions humans traded without thinking, the offerings, the knotted shoes, the cracked dolls. I thought of the coin in the well and of the foreigner's laugh. I thought of how curiosity can be a key that fits perfectly into something designed to keep a door shut. That night, as rain tapped at the roof and the village slept around a temple that did not offer peace, I felt the first cold of being watched. At first it was only the prickle at the base of my skull, the way a person's name feels heavy behind your teeth. Then I began to hear between the rain's conversation a sound like someone setting a kiln, slow, patient, making room for what will be kept. I do not yet know whether I chose to stay or whether the village chose me. But there are things I would like to tell you about how a place keeps its promises and the ways in which we keep our own. For now, keep your eyes on the lamplight. Listen for the sound of knots being tied. Watch where shoes are left. The temple keeps accounts, and it always remembers what humans think they have lost. I learned quickly that the temple had no priest in the sense I understood. There was no sermon, no recited scripture, no hand raised to bless or condemn. The keeper, the man of thinning hair and rust-root tea, was not a priest so much as a clerk. He did not preach. He recorded. His presence reminded me of those silent attendants in museums who watch you, not to protect the artifacts, but to ensure you never forget they are watching. One morning, when the mist clung to the village roofs like damp cloth, I returned to the temple uninvited. The door was open, which surprised me. Inside, the air smelled faintly of ink and dust, the kind of ink that never fully dries, staining everything it touches. At the far end of the room stood a table, and upon that table lay a book. Not a book in the ordinary sense. Its cover was of stretched hide, darkened by oils of many hands. The edges curled as if the book had grown weary of its own weight. I should not have gone near it, but curiosity is a trait that arrives before permission. When I leaned close, I saw that the pages were filled not with names, but with faces. Faces sketched in uneven strokes, some delicate as whispers, others gouged deep into the paper as though carved by a desperate hand. Every page was a collection, eyes that stared too directly, mouths that hung open as if caught mid-protest, children with hair tied in knots, elders with lines etched deep. The keeper entered silently. I had not heard him, though my ears had been straining for the scrape of sandals. He placed a hand on the book, fingers splayed like a lid shutting. "You should not look," he said, though his voice was calm, almost fatherly. "What is it?" I asked. "A ledger?" "A ledger," he agreed, "but not of the kind you know. It does not record debts of money or land or time. It keeps something heavier." I asked him whose faces these were. He studied me with eyes that seemed to know my question had already been answered. "All who are marked," he said at last. I could not resist. "Am I in there?" He did not look. "Not yet." That was meant as reassurance, but it struck me like a verdict delayed. The villagers believed the book had existed as long as the demon itself. It was said the demon had no interest in writing, no hands for ink, no patience for symbols. But it liked memory, and memory was slippery. So the villagers, in their devotion or their fear, took it upon themselves to record what the demon noticed. That was the pact. Not sacrifice, not worship songs, but memory. They would keep the book on its behalf. The logic is difficult to explain unless you have lived in a place where silence feels like law. In their minds, to write the faces was to acknowledge them, to fix them in place, to satisfy the demon's hunger for recognition. It was, in some grotesque sense, respect. But there was something more unsettling. I noticed, flipping a corner before the keeper could stop me, that some faces were crossed out. Not erased, not rubbed away, but scored through with thick black lines. I asked what that meant. "They are gone," the keeper said. His words had the finality of soil falling on a coffin lid. Dead? I pressed. Not always, he said. Sometimes they are simply taken. To be crossed out is not always to die. It is to no longer belong to us. That night I could not sleep. The ledger's pages stayed in my mind like a fever. I dreamed of faces pressed into paper. Mouths moving through the page refused to make sound. In the dream I bent closer, and the mouths were whispering one word. Remember. When I woke, the taste of rust lingered in my mouth, though I had not drunk the keeper's tea. I tried to speak with others. An old woman selling rice cakes told me that each outsider who came and lingered too long ended up in the ledger. It is not punishment, she said. It is gravity. You stand here long enough and you are pulled in. A younger man, his hands red with the dye used for lantern paper, muttered that the book had grown heavier in recent years. More faces, he said. Too many to turn easily. We fear one day it will be too heavy to close, and then it will stay open, and all of us will belong. The boy with the pockmarks, my quiet observer, approached me on the lane. He pointed at my notebook, the one where I had been scribbling observations and questions. Be careful, he said. Of what? Of writing. Every word is a step closer. On the 5th day, I heard the temple bell at dawn. Its sound was unlike any bell I had known. Dull, flat, as if struck underwater. The villagers gathered, not in panic, but in solemnity. The keeper opened the book before them and laid a finger on a fresh page. Slowly he began to draw. I should not have watched, but I did. He sketched with a reed brush dipped in dark ink. The lines curved, joined, deepened. A face emerged, not perfect, not detailed, but undeniable. A man's face. It was the foreigner's. Gasps rippled among the villagers. Some turned away, others whispered prayers that sounded less like hope and more like bargaining. The keeper wrote nothing else. Not a name, not a date. Only the face. When he finished, he closed the book with a motion so deliberate it made the air tremble. The villagers bowed, not to the keeper, but to the closed cover, and then they dispersed as if nothing more could be said. I stood frozen. The foreigner's face on the page seemed to fix me in place as surely as a nail through wood. He was gone, yes, but now I understood he was not forgotten. He was claimed. The ledger haunted me more than the disappearance itself. It suggested order, ritual, a bureaucracy of fear. The demon was not chaos, it was administration. It kept accounts. And that was worse, because chaos is careless, but accounts are always collected. I write this now by the dim light of a single oil lamp, the wick coughing smoke into the ceiling beams. I have considered leaving. The road that brought me here still lies behind the bend, though the bus may not return. The villagers would not stop me, but neither would they help me go. Yet something keeps me. A hunger, yes, curiosity, but also a sense that leaving now would not erase the page already begun for me. Perhaps the boy is right. Writing is a step closer, and each word I set down in this notebook may be a rope I cannot untie. Still I continue, because if I do not write it, the memory belongs only to the demon, and if I write it, perhaps someone, somewhere, will know what happened in this village where gods are absent, but a ledger is kept. So if my face ever appears in that book, if the ink drags me across its surface, let this notebook serve as my refusal. Let it say, I was here, I saw, I tried to understand. But perhaps that is the greatest folly. For in this village, understanding may itself be a form of worship. The well stands at the edge of the village like a mouth that never learned to close. During daylight, it seems nothing more than a ring of stone, moss creeping along the cracks, a rope hanging stiff with age. But by dusk it changes. The shadows around it grow longer than they should, and the air near its rim carries a hush, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. The villagers avoid it at night. Children do not play there. Even the stray dogs circle wide. Yet it is the well that binds the village, the well that feeds the temple, the well whose name is never spoken aloud. I first learned of this silence from the old woman who sold rice cakes. Her hands, wrinkled like dried persimmons, trembled as she passed me a bundle wrapped in lotus leaf. "Do not go near the mouth," she whispered, "and if you must, never say his name." "His?" I asked. Her eyes darted toward the temple, then back to me. "The well is not a thing. It is a someone." The keeper was less evasive. Perhaps he had grown weary of my questions, or perhaps he wanted me to understand enough to fear. He brought me to the well at dawn, when the mist blurred its stones into shapes that seemed half-remembered. "Once," he said, "this was a place of life. The spring was clear. Travelers came here to drink, and the water carried them safely across mountains. But in times of hunger, people prayed too hard, asked too much. They begged for harvest, for rain, for mercy. And one night, something answered. Not a god, something older, something hungrier. The villagers threw grain into the well, then animals, then blood. At last, a child." He paused. The mist curled between us. "Since then, it is not a well. It is a wound with a name we do not speak." I asked what happened to the child. The keeper did not answer directly. He only said, "The demon remembers, and when he remembers, he does not forgive." That evening, I sat near the well despite their warnings. The rope swayed, though there was no wind. I leaned close, foolish with curiosity, and thought I heard something. Like water echoing, but broken, syllables half-formed. It reminded me of the way my name sounds when someone dreams it. I pulled back quickly, heart thudding. I realized then why the villagers refused to speak the well's name. Words carry weight. To name is to summon, to acknowledge. And here, acknowledgement is an offering. The boy with the pockmarks found me. He held a lantern, the flames shaking with his hands. "You shouldn't sit here," he said. "It listens." "What does it listen for?" "For someone who isn't afraid to speak." He told me then of a story he should not have known at his age. Years ago, before he was born, another foreigner had come. Not a scholar, not a man of questions, but a merchant. He was loud, certain, dismissive of village warnings. When the villagers refused to sell him charms or trinkets, he mocked them. "Superstition," he said, and spat near the well. That night the villagers heard his voice, not calling, not crying, but singing, a lullaby none recognized. They found his belongings by the well, neat as if folded by careful hands. His name was never written in the ledger, because the boy explained the demon had written it himself. "What do you mean?" I asked. The boy stared into the well, his face pale in lantern light. "If he claims you directly, he does not need ink." Days passed, and I found myself circling the well each time I walked the village lanes, as though drawn by a thread. I told myself I was only observing, but deep down I knew better. The well had become a question in my mind, and questions are dangerous when fed by silence. One evening, a storm rolled across the mountains. The sky split with thunder, and the villagers rushed to shutter windows and tie their doors. I lingered near the well, rain stinging my skin, when I saw the keeper approach. He held a lantern shielded under his sleeve. "You test him," the keeper said. His tone was not anger, but weariness. "I need to understand," I said. "If this is a demon, what is his nature? What does he want?" The keeper's eyes were dark pools deeper than the rain. "He wants what all wounds want, to be remembered, to be fed, to never close." He placed a hand on the rope. "And every time someone speaks his name, the wound deepens." That night I dreamed again. The ledger's pages fluttered, but instead of ink, they were wet with water, droplets sliding into words I could not read. In the dream, the well whispered, not in language, but in recognition. It was the sound of my own breath returned to me. I woke with my throat dry, as though I had been speaking in my sleep. I have not yet spoken the well's name, though I feel it pressing at the edge of memory. The villagers know it, though they hide it behind silence. Perhaps one day I will hear it clearly. Perhaps I already have. But for now, I write this warning. When you travel, when you see a well standing alone, do not lean too close. Do not whisper your secrets into its mouth. And above all, do not give it your name. Because some wells are not meant to quench thirst. Some wells drink only voices. And once your voice is swallowed, you belong to the silence. It was the shoes that warned me first. One morning when the fog still pressed low against the village lanes, I saw them lying neatly before the temple door. A child's pair of cloth shoes, blue ones, though the color had drained like old bruises. The laces were knotted tight, not in the clumsy way a child ties them, but in a pattern deliberate, almost ceremonial. I bent down to study them, and when I touched the laces, I felt a shiver travel up my fingers, as though the knot itself remembered the hand that had tied it. The villagers passed without comment. Some glanced quickly, then lowered their eyes. Others carried baskets as if the shoes were no more than fallen leaves. Only the boy with the pockmarks lingered. He stood a few steps away, his face pale. "They always come back," he said softly. "Whose shoes are these?" what I asked. He shook his head. "No one will say, but we know." I did not understand until later that day. A woman came crying into the square, clutching at her sleeves. Her daughter had not returned from the night before. She had been seen last near the marsh, chasing a paper lantern. By morning there was no trace, only the shoes. The villagers murmured, not with shock, but with the heaviness of those who have carried the same grief before. The keeper came, lifted the shoes, and placed them carefully at the temple's threshold, as one might offer incense. No one asked questions. No one searched the marsh. I wanted to shout at them, to demand action, but something in their faces silenced me. It was not fear. It was resignation, as though they had already counted the girl among the ledger's pages. That night I could not rest. I walked to the marsh, carrying a lantern of my own. The reeds hissed with the wind, brushing against one another like whispers. Somewhere in the dark, a frog croaked once, then fell silent. I found no child, no lantern, but on the damp earth near the water's edge, I found footprints, small, bare, leading into the reeds, and beside them, another mark. Not quite a footprint, not quite human, a dragging as if something had pulled itself alongside her, leaving grooves like fingers in mud. I followed until the reeds grew so thick they pressed against my chest. The air smelled of rot and old iron. Then I heard it, a sound like laces being pulled, slow, deliberate, tightening. I fled before I saw more. The next morning I returned to the temple. The shoes were still there, but now the knots had changed. They were tighter, more intricate, the pattern resembling a spiral that pulled inward. I thought of the dragging grooves, of the sound of tightening. I began to wonder if the demon did not merely take but tied, bound. The keeper caught me staring. "Do you see?" he asked. "What does it mean?" He sighed, the sound like old paper folding. "Every child knows how to tie a knot. It is the first lesson. How to hold what you love, how to keep it near. But he gestured toward the temple. He ties differently, not to hold, to claim." I asked why the shoes were always returned. Because he wants us to remember, to walk past each day and know what has been taken. Forgetting is an insult. He demands memory. That night I dreamed of shoes, hundreds of them, lined along the temple steps. Each pair knotted, each knot different, spirals, crosses, tangled webs. I tried to untie them, but the laces grew longer, winding around my wrists, pulling me toward the well. And as I was dragged, I heard children laughing, not with joy, but with the brittle echo of voices no longer their own. When I woke, the sheets were twisted tight around my arms. I began to notice more. Shoes left not only at the temple, but near the well, near doorways, even along the narrow bridge at the village edge. Always knotted, always returned. Each one a marker, a reminder. The boy with the pockmarks told me in hushed tones that sometimes the knots changed on their own. I saw it once, he whispered. A pair left outside my uncle's house. In the morning, the laces were tied in a knot no one knew how to make. My uncle swore he hadn't touched them. We burned them. But the next day, new shoes were there. I asked him if anyone had ever untied the knots. He looked horrified. That would be disrespect. It would mean you are ready to take their place. The keeper showed me a page in the ledger. On it, among the faces, a crude sketch of knotted shoes. Some debts are not of flesh, he said. Some are symbols. Each knot is a reminder that we belong, that we cannot leave. I asked if the missing children ever return. He closed the ledger slowly. Shoes do. Children don't. I should have left the village then. I should have turned my back on the knots, the shoes, the ledger. But there is something seductive about patterns, even those of grief. You begin to believe that if you can just learn the shape, just untangle the logic, you will find the truth. And so I stayed and I watched and I listened for the sound of laces being drawn tight in the dark. Because once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. It follows you, like footsteps behind your own. And when you look down, you half expect to see your shoes missing, left at the temple, neatly knotted, waiting for someone else to walk past and remember. It was during the nights that the village taught its truest lessons, not by words but by silence. In the day, you could almost believe it was like any other place. Children running through lanes, women haggling softly over vegetables, men repairing nets or carts. The sun lent everything a fragile normalcy, as though light itself was a disguise. But when night arrived and the oil lamps lit one by one, the truth unfolded. The village was not alive at night. It was remembered. I learned this on the 7th evening of my stay. The boy with the pockmarks came to my door just after dusk, lantern in hand. His face was tense, his eyes restless, as though he had been sent. "You must come," he whispered. "Where?" "To the temple. Tonight you will hear the lesson." The temple was already crowded when we arrived. Villagers sat cross-legged on the worn stone floor, heads bowed. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft drip of water somewhere in the rafters, as if the temple itself perspired. The keeper stood before the altar. He held no book, no incense, only a bell the size of a child's skull, tarnished, its surface etched with lines that seemed to twist when you looked too long. He struck it once, and the sound was not like a bell at all. It was a vibration that seemed to crawl beneath the skin, making every hair stand stiff. Then silence again. The villagers waited. Their breathing slowed until it matched the rhythm of something I could not hear, but could feel, pulsing through the floor, the walls, the marrow of my bones. The keeper spoke at last, not loudly but with words that carried weight heavier than their sound. "Tonight we remember. Tonight we listen." At first I thought he meant listening to him, but then I realized it was not his voice they were straining for. It was something behind it, beneath it. The silence thickened. It became a presence. My ears strained, and then I caught it, like a thread pulled too thin. A murmur, not words, not song, but a vibration, deep and ancient. The kind of sound that makes you think of the earth shifting far below your feet. The villagers bowed lower. Some wept quietly. A child whimpered and was hushed by a mother's hand. I felt the sound enter me, not through my ears, but deeper, through the hollows of my chest, my ribs, my teeth. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought I saw shapes moving at the edges of the temple, shadows not cast by any flame, slipping behind the wooden beams, bending at angles that should not exist. The boy touched my sleeve. "Don't look," he whispered. "Just listen." So I closed my eyes. When I did, the sound changed. It became memory, my own memory, not theirs. I saw my childhood home, the narrow window above my bed, the way the moon once traced silver lines across the floor. I heard my mother's voice calling me in for supper. though she has been gone many years. I felt the ache of things lost. Then the memory shifted, too quickly, too violently. I saw not my home, but faces from the ledger, mouths whispering, shoes lined across my path, the well yawning open, the knots tightening, and behind it all the low voice of something vast, something patient, repeating the same pulse again and again. Remember, remember, remember. The bell rang again. The vibration broke. My eyes snapped open. The villagers lifted their heads, their faces streaked with tears, sweat shining like oil on their brows. The keeper bowed once toward the altar, then turned away. The lesson was over. No one spoke as they left. Each lantern bobbed into the night, swallowed by lanes of shadow. Only the boy remained beside me. "What was that?" I asked, my throat raw. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw pity in his eyes. "That is how he teaches us," he said, "through silence, through memory. Every night we listen, so he will not take more than he must. And if you stop?" His face went pale. "We never stop." That night back in my room, I could not write. My notebook lay open, but the words I tried to put down bent away from me, like frightened birds. Each time my pen touched the paper, I heard the echo of the bell and the sound underneath it. I blew out my lamp. The dark was absolute. Yet in the silence I felt it again. That pulse, faint but steady, as though the village itself had a heartbeat. I lay awake until dawn, wondering if my own heart was beating to its rhythm. The next day I asked the keeper what the lessons meant. "They mean nothing," he said. "They are not for meaning. They are for survival." "But what are we surviving?" He did not answer directly. Instead, he poured me tea and said, "There is a debt. We pay in memory. We pay in silence. That is all." I want to tell you I was brave, that I resisted, but the truth is simpler. The lessons worked. The following night, I found myself at the temple again, sitting cross-legged among villagers, waiting for the bell. And when it rang, when the silence deepened, I closed my eyes willingly. Because already I feared what might happen if I did not. The foreigner's face haunted me more after his disappearance than it ever did in life. Not because of who he was, but because of what he left behind. He had been careless, loud, dismissive, everything the village was not. And yet in that very arrogance, he carried with him tools the villagers had never seen. A heavy black camera, notebooks filled with crooked handwriting, and a small recorder that hissed softly when played back. When he vanished, his belongings remained, and slowly they began to make their way into my hands. It began with the boy. He found me near the well one afternoon, holding a battered satchel. "They don't want it," he said, eyes darting around the lane. "But you, maybe you should see." Inside the satchel were the foreigner's notes, page after page of observations, some academic, some crude, sketches of the temple, diagrams of the well's structure, even attempts to copy the faces from the ledger, and between these, scribbles of words that made no sense, half sentences, fragments of questions, lines crossed out so violently the paper tore. But it was the photographs that disturbed me most. The camera was old-fashioned, film-based, clunky in weight. I doubted the villagers had even touched it. With trembling hands, I opened the back and found rolls of film still inside. That night, with the help of a small lantern, I held the negatives up to the light. The images bled through, grainy, blurred, but unmistakable. The first frames were ordinary, children running, lanterns swaying, the temple's roof. Then came the others. Faces, dozens of them. Not posed, not deliberate. Faces caught in glass windows, in water, in the corners of alleys. Faces of people who were not there. One frame showed the well. Behind it, faint but visible, a row of shoes, knotted. Yet when I had stood there myself, the stones were bare. Another frame showed the temple's doorway. The door was closed, but in its grain of wood, a mouth gaped. I thought it was a trick of light until I noticed that the next frame showed it wider. And then, the final image, a self-portrait. The foreigner smiling at the camera, one arm extended, but his smile looked wrong, too wide as though pulled from his skin. And behind him, in the corner of the frame, something leaned, a shape without edge, darker than shadow, watching. The villagers refused to look at the photographs. When I tried to show the keeper, he closed his eyes. He should not have taken those, he said. Why? I demanded. Because to capture is to keep, and what he kept does not want to be kept. The recorder was worse. I pressed play one night. Curiosity stronger than fear. At first only the sound of his voice, mocking, amused, notes to himself. Temple appears unused, he said. Offerings are primitive. Locals compliant, though secretive. No threat. Then a pause, a different sound emerged. Low, almost inaudible, like a hum caught in the wires. He spoke again, but his tone shifted. Strange. I hear something. Can you hear it? The tape crackled, then silence, and then singing, not his voice. Not human, a melody so low it seemed to come from the bones of the earth. Slow, deliberate, circling the same notes again and again. I stopped the tape, heart pounding. When I pressed play once more, it was gone. Only his laughter strained, as though covering fear. I think it's in the well, he whispered. The tape ended with the sound of a knot tightening. I should have destroyed it all, the photos, the notes, the tape, but I couldn't. Instead, I began to copy them into my own notebook, as though by rewriting his madness I could understand it. That was when I noticed something horrifying. Among his sketches were faces, faces not of villagers, not of me, faces I had never seen. Yet they matched perfectly with the ledger. Same crooked lines, same haunting eyes. But the foreigner had never seen the ledger. He had only seen the temple, the well, the shoes. So how did he know? The keeper gave me no comfort. The ledger is not only in the book, he said. It is in memory. It is in those who look too long. He carried it with him the moment he mocked it. Then what of me? I asked. The keeper placed a hand on my shoulder. You write, don't you? You copy. That is enough. I cannot shake the thought that by handling the photographs, by playing the recorder, by copying the sketches, I have become part of another ledger, the foreigner's own. His desperate attempt to record what should not be remembered has become my inheritance, and perhaps, in time, yours. Because even now, as I write these words, I hear the faint click of a camera shutter in the dark. No one is here. No one holds a lens. Yet the sound repeats, patient, steady, as if someone is still trying to keep account. The village did not begin as a place of demons. It began as all villages do, with hunger. One evening, the keeper told me the story. We sat outside the temple, oil lamp between us, the flame trembling like a secret struggling to hold its shape. His voice was low, not because he feared being overheard, but because the story itself demanded softness. Long ago, he began, this land knew famine. The rains failed, the fields cracked open, families fed on bark and weeds, but still they starved. The elders gathered at the well, then only a spring of clean water, and begged the gods for mercy. But no god answered, only the silence of stone. He paused, his face flickering in the lamplight. And then, something else did. The villagers made a promise that night, not to a god, but to the voice in the well. They offered grain, then livestock. In return, the rains came, thin but enough. Crops grew again, barely sustaining them. Gratitude turned to devotion, and when the voice asked for more, they gave. At first, it was ritual items, dolls, carved wooden effigies, later offerings of blood. Then when a second famine struck, the demand rose higher. A child, the keeper said, his eyes heavy. They gave a child. I asked if it was sacrifice or bargain. He shook his head. It was survival, and once such a promise is made, it cannot be unmade. The demon remembered, and so the temple was built, not for worship, but for debt, a place to record what was owed. The boy had told me once, shoes come back, children don't. Now I understood why. The temple was not a place of reverence. It was an account book carved into wood and stone, a reminder of a promise too heavy to forget. The villagers were not believers. They were inheritors of a contract. And yet what unsettled me most was not the cruelty of the pact. It was the way the villagers carried it, quietly without rebellion, as though obligation had woven itself into their blood. That night the keeper opened the ledger for me again. He turned to one of the earliest pages. The sketches there were crude, worn by time. Among them I saw the faint outline of a child's face. The strokes trembled, as though the hand that drew it had not stopped shaking. This was the first, he said. What was the child's name? He did not answer. Perhaps he did not know. Perhaps it was forbidden to say. Perhaps in this village, to name is to feed. The boy with the pockmarks joined us then, carrying a tray with tea. He listened as the keeper closed the book. We are all born from that promise, the boy said suddenly. His voice cracked with youth, but his words were older than him. The keeper looked sharply at him. Do not speak of it so plainly. But I pressed. What do you mean, born from the promise? The boy lowered his eyes. We are alive because others were given. If not for the pact, the famine would have killed everyone. Our lives are not gifts. They are debts. That thought clung to me. To live as a debt. To breathe knowing each breath was bought by another's silence. I began to see it everywhere. In the way villagers bowed to the shoes at the temple steps. In the way mothers clutched their children tighter when thunder rolled. In the hush that fell each night when the lessons began. They were not living for themselves. They were living to uphold a bargain. The next day I ventured further into the marsh, searching for answers. The reeds whispered, water lapped at my ankles, and dragonflies spun restless circles overhead. I came upon a half-buried stone marker, eroded with age. Symbols carved upon it were barely legible, but I recognized the repetition. Spirals, knots, the same patterns tied into the shoes. And beneath them, faintly, characters that spoke of promise, continuance, remembrance. I traced them with my finger, and the stone felt warm, as if it remembered my touch before I made it. That night I returned to the temple again, restless. The keeper sat inside, lantern before him, ledger closed. Why tell me all this? I asked. Why let me see the book? Hear the story? If this is your burden, why share it? He looked at me for a long time. Because outsiders always come, and they always think they will leave with knowledge. They do not understand. Once you hear the promise, you are part of it. Whether you accept or not, you have already remembered on its behalf. I felt the truth of his words like a knot tightening in my chest. When I tried to sleep, dreams came uninvited. I saw the famine, the cracked fields, the crying children. I saw the elders kneeling at the well, their hands raw from begging. I heard the voice rising from the stone mouth, low and patient, promising survival in exchange for memory. And then I saw the child, small, trembling, led to the well. Shoes knotted neatly, a face blurred by time. As the child leaned over the rim, the dream ended. I woke with tears on my face. I write this now with shaking hands, because I realize the true cruelty of the pact. It is not the taking of life. It is the passing of memory. Each generation inherits not only the safety the promise buys, but also the guilt. The children grow knowing they are alive because others were not. And so the cycle continues, not of faith, but of debt. The demon does not hunger for flesh alone. It hungers for continuity, for remembrance. And now I fear it has found continuity in me. It happened in the most ordinary way. That is what makes it unbearable. The villagers gathered at the square on a gray afternoon. Rain threatened, but never fell. The clouds hung heavy, like a lid pressed too tightly over the sky. Mothers clutched their children close, whispering into their ears as though feeding them last-minute prayers. Fathers kept their hands clenched at their sides. The boy with the pockmark stood near me, pale and tense, his lantern unlit in daylight. I did not understand, not until the keeper walked forward holding a bundle in his arms. It was a child, no older than 6, wrapped in red cloth, small feet bare. The child was not crying, only watching the sky with wide, unblinking eyes as if the heavens themselves were more terrifying than the ground. The keeper spoke. His words were not dramatic. They were steady, like the ringing of a quiet bell. The rains have failed again. The promise must be kept. No one protested. No one begged. The crowd only bowed their heads, shoulders trembling. I wanted to scream. I wanted to seize the child and run. But my legs would not move. The air itself seemed to press down, rooting me in place. The keeper carried the child toward the well. The rope swayed though there was no wind. The stone mouth seemed wider than before, as though anticipating. The boy at my side whispered, "It is the exchange." When the keeper reached the well, he did not lower the child in. Instead, he knelt and tied the child's feet with a strip of cloth. Not cruelly, but with reverence. The knot was precise, deliberate, another of the spirals I had seen on the shoes. Then he placed the child down gently, feet touching the cold stone rim. The child leaned forward of their own accord, as if listening. For a moment I thought I heard singing rise from the darkness below. A low melody, coaxing, promising, and then silence. The keeper lifted the child back into his arms, alive, breathing, but changed. The child's eyes were blank, as though part of them had been left in the well. He handed the child to the mother. She wept, holding her son close. The villagers sighed in relief, some bowing toward the well. I was shaking. "What just happened?" I demanded of the boy. "He did not take the child," the boy whispered. "Not fully, only part." "What part?" The boy stared at me with eyes too old for his face. "The part that remembers." That night I saw the child again. He walked through the lane with other children, silent, eyes distant. The others laughed, chased one another, but he did not join. When his mother called, he came obediently, but without recognition, like a shadow answering to its owner. I understood then. The exchange was not life for life, but memory for safety. The demon took not the body, but the essence that made the body belong to itself. And so the village remained safe. Crops eventually returned, storms passed. But the cost was a child who no longer remembered the warmth of his own name. The keeper explained it to me in his calm way. We give what is asked, sometimes shoes, sometimes memory, sometimes more. In return, we survive. That is the promise. And if you refuse, I asked. He closed the ledger with a sound like thunder far away. Refusal is not survival. The horror is not in the taking. It is in the villagers' acceptance. They do not fight. They do not flee. They remain bound by a pact older than their own lives. And in their acceptance, they teach their children the same silence, the same bowed heads, the same readiness to exchange what should never be given. I began to wonder if I, too, had already been marked for exchange. Not my life, something subtler, my memory, my voice, my will. Each night I sat in the temple, listening to the lessons. I felt more of myself slipping, drawn into the rhythm of that hidden pulse. 2 nights after the ritual, I dreamed of the child. He stood at the edge of my bed, shoes knotted tight, staring with empty eyes. He opened his mouth and the sound that came was not his own voice, but the low hum from the recorder, the same melody that haunted the foreigner's tape. When I woke, my shoes were at the foot of the bed, knotted. I untied them in panic, fingers trembling. But the knots resisted, tightening the more I pulled. At last they loosened suddenly, as if mocking me. I put the shoes away, far from sight, but the fear remained. Because in this village, once something is exchanged, it is never fully returned. The keeper once told me the pact was simple: give and you will live. But by the ninth night, I realized simplicity was the cruelest lie, because bargains are never truly simple. Someone always pays more than they knew they owed. It began with whispers. The boy with the pockmarks told me he overheard the elders arguing inside the lantern house. Their voices were low, sharp, like knives striking stone. They promised too much, one said. The well remembers, said another. We cannot keep paying, a third insisted. But then came the keeper's voice, steady as ever. A promise made is a promise owned. To deny it now is to betray the very silence that saved us. Betrayal. The word clung to me. Not betrayal of the demon, but betrayal of themselves. That evening, when the lessons began, I kept my eyes open despite the boy's warning. Shadows bent and curled in the temple corners, faces from the ledger sliding across the walls. And among them, I saw something I should not have. The keeper himself, bowing lower than the others, his lips moving in silent prayer. Not to the people, not for them. To it. For the first time, I wondered if he had ceased to be a guardian and had become something else entirely. Not servant, not believer, but accomplice. Later, when I confronted him, he did not deny it. You think me a traitor, he said calmly, his hand on the closed ledger. But I keep us alive. At what cost? I demanded. He looked at me with weary eyes. Better a village haunted than a village buried. But you kneel to it, I pressed. Not as a recorder, not as a clerk, but as if you belong to it. He sighed. Perhaps I do. Perhaps we all do. The betrayal deepened days later, when another child disappeared. This time the shoes were never returned. The villagers grieved quietly, but none accused. None except the boy. He found me by the marsh, his voice trembling with fury. They gave her, he said, not as an exchange, as an offering. I stared at him. How do you know? I saw them, he whispered. The elders, with the keeper. They carried her to the well. She struggled. She screamed. They pushed her forward. And when they returned, they said she wandered too far. They lied. The boy's face was pale with shock, but his words burned with conviction. It was not the demon that asked. It was them. They chose her. They betrayed us. I wanted to dismiss it as a child's terror, but then I remembered the whispers in the lantern house. We cannot keep paying. Perhaps in their desperation, they had tried to balance the scales themselves. Instead of waiting for the demon to demand, they offered first, hoping to satisfy, hoping to delay. That was not bargain. That was betrayal. That night the dreams grew worse. I saw the keeper at the well, ledger in hand, writing faces not drawn by memory but by choice, choosing who would be taken, choosing who would be crossed out. And when I looked closer, I saw my own face, not sketched but already blackened, as though erased before it was drawn. I woke with a scream caught in my throat. I confronted the keeper again. He did not flinch at my accusations. You chose, I said. You decide who is taken. You offer before he asks. He was silent for a long time, then said softly, a leader must choose who dies so that the rest may live. That is not leadership, I spat. That is betrayal. His gaze hardened. And yet you stay. The words cut deeper than I expected, because he was right. Despite everything, I stayed. Whether out of fear, curiosity, or the slow pull of the ledger, I could not leave. And in staying, perhaps I too was complicit. The boy refused silence. That evening in the square, he cried out before the villagers. You gave her! He shouted. You lied! You pushed her into the well! Gasps filled the square. Mothers covered their children's ears. The elders glared, fury blazing in their old eyes. The keeper stepped forward, calm as always. The boy speaks in grief, he said. He does not understand the weight of promises. But I saw it, the flicker in the villagers' faces. Doubt, fear, suspicion. For the first time, the silence cracked. That night, the well sang louder. Not a hum, not a whisper, but a song, clear and commanding. The entire village woke to it. Some wept. Some fell to their knees. And above the melody came a single word, repeated again and again, echoing through stone and bone alike. Betrayal. I write this now with trembling hands because I do not know who betrayed whom first. Did the villagers betray the demon by doubting? Did the elders betray their people by choosing who to give? Or did I betray myself by staying, writing, recording, as though memory itself is not already an offering? Perhaps it does not matter. Perhaps in this village, every bargain ends in betrayal, and perhaps that is what keeps the well open. The villagers never spoke his name. They said it was forbidden, that to pronounce it aloud was to place yourself on the edge of the well. And yet, names have a way of pressing forward. Even silence cannot bury them forever. It began with a slip. An elder, her hair long as the reeds, muttered in her sleep one night. The boy with the pockmarks heard it through the thin walls. A single syllable, guttural, heavy like stone striking water. The next morning, she was gone. Her shoes were by her doorway, knotted tightly. No one repeated what she had said, but I saw it in their eyes. The name had returned. I could not help myself. I pressed the keeper. "What is it? What is his name?" The keeper's face darkened. "Names are not for you." "Then how do you keep him bound if you do not speak it?" He opened the ledger. On one of the earliest pages, faintly, the characters were there. Not written fully, not cleanly. The strokes bent oddly as if even the ink had resisted. But I could see it. I could read it. The sound formed in my mind, unbidden, harsh, broken, like wind howling down an empty shaft. My lips parted before I could stop myself. The keeper slammed the ledger shut. "Do not," he hissed, "not even in thought." That night the lessons changed. The bell rang, and the silence pressed tighter, heavier. When I closed my eyes, I heard not the usual hum, but syllables repeated again and again until they became indistinguishable from heartbeat. A name, his name. The villagers shook, some clawing at their ears, others mouthing prayers. The boy clutched my sleeve, whispering through clenched teeth, "Don't listen." But I did, and in the rhythm I understood. The demon did not crave sacrifice alone. He craved acknowledgement. Names anchor, names summon, names bind. Without a name, he was only shadow. With it, he was history. The boy told me later, trembling, "Each time someone speaks it, even in dreams, he grows stronger. That is why we never say it. We remember without words. Memory is safer than sound." "But how can silence protect you forever?" I asked. He looked away. "It doesn't." I began to wonder if my own curiosity had already betrayed me. The syllables burned at the edge of my thoughts, insistent. I wanted to say them, to test their weight, to see what would happen if the name was given voice. And that was when I realized the cruel paradox. To resist the name was to remember it more fiercely. The harder I tried to banish it, the deeper it carved itself into me. Silence became its echo. Days later, the boy disappeared. His shoes were found at the temple steps, tied in knots so complex no one could untangle them. The villagers mourned, heads bowed low. But I felt something else. Guilt. Because I had thought the name too often. I had carried it with me. And perhaps, in doing so, I had offered him. The keeper confronted me at dusk. His voice was sharp for the first time. "You let it inside." "I didn't speak it," I protested. "I only thought—" "That is enough," he snapped. "Names live in thought as surely as in air. You carried him closer, and he took what was near you." I felt hollow. I wanted to argue, but the truth hung heavier than my words. That night I dreamed of the boy. He stood in the reeds, lantern in hand. His mouth opened, but no voice came. Instead, he wrote on the air with light, tracing the syllables of the name over and over until they glowed like scars in the dark. When I woke, the sound was in my room. A whisper, low and patient, circling the same syllables again and again. My notebook lay open on the floor, and on its page, though my pen had not touched it, the name was written. I tell you this with caution. Do not search for it. Do not try to pronounce it. Some names do not belong in your mouth, because once spoken, they do not leave. They wait, they listen, and they answer. The night after the boy vanished, the village no longer pretended to be whole. The air was heavy, not with rain, but with shame. Mothers pressed their children closer. Fathers walked with their eyes fixed on the ground. No one spoke of the boy's name. His shoes, still knotted, lay at the temple steps, untouched. Even the dogs circled wide. I felt the absence like a wound. He had been the only one who dared to question aloud. Now he was gone, and silence reclaimed the lanes. But silence was no longer enough. The keeper summoned the villagers at dawn. His voice carried through the mist. A debt remains. It must be paid. He spoke not of survival, not of choice, only of balance. The elders nodded, their faces grim. The villagers bowed their heads. None argued, none resisted. And then his eyes turned to me. You have stayed too long, he said. My blood turned cold. You have listened to lessons not meant for your ears. You have written what was not yours to record. You have carried thoughts you should never have spoken inside your heart. I wanted to protest, to scream that I had never spoken the name aloud, that I had never chosen to betray anyone. But his gaze pinned me in place. The debt must be paid, he said again, softer this time, almost with pity. They bound my wrists with strips of cloth, not harshly, not cruelly, but with the same reverence they used on the children during the exchange, as though my body was no longer mine, but part of a ritual. They led me toward the well. Each step was agony, not from the cloth, not from the pull of their hands, but from the weight of inevitability. The lane narrowed, the houses leaned away, the sky pressed lower, and the well waited, its ropes swaying gently, hungry. I thought of the foreigner, of the child offered years ago, of the shoes, the knots, the ledger. Each memory pressed upon me until I realized this was what the demon desired all along. Not flesh, not blood, memory, and I had written too much of it. At the well, the keeper raised his hand. The villagers stopped. His face was solemn, carved from years of duty. You may speak, he said, if you wish. For a moment the temptation burned in me, to scream the demon's name, to hurl it into the air, to let sound itself be my rebellion. But I remembered the boy's warning. To name is to feed. To resist is the only defiance. So I stayed silent. The keeper leaned close. You carry the debt of outsiders who came before you. Their voices, their arrogance, their memory. You will pay it now. He pushed me forward. My feet touched the rim. The rope brushed my skin like a living thing. The darkness below yawned, endless, patient. And then I felt it. Not a hand, not a pull, a recognition. The same hum I had heard in dreams, the same syllables pressing at the edge of thought. It was inside me, waiting. And in that moment I understood. The debt was not to give my life, but to give my remembering. To let go of what I had carried, all the stories, all the warnings, all the images of shoes and knots and faces. To forget. But I could not. I could not let the memory vanish into the well. Because if I forgot, then the ledger would hold everything, and no one beyond this village would know. I opened my mouth. The villagers leaned closer. The keeper's eyes narrowed. I did not speak the demon's name. I spoke mine. I am still here, I said. I remember. The sound cracked through the air like a branch splitting. The villagers recoiled. The rope twitched violently, as though in pain. From the well came a groan, deep, furious. The keeper shouted, "Silence him!" But it was too late. The word had already left me. Not a forbidden name, not a bargain, Not a prayer. My own name. My own defiance. The ground shuddered. The air turned thick, filled with the smell of iron and damp stone. The villagers fell to their knees, covering their ears. The keeper clutched the ledger, his hands trembling. And from the depths of the well came a voice, not in syllables, not in song, but in rage. Debt, debt, debt. The sound tore through me, rattling my bones. But I held on. I repeated my name again, louder this time, until it drowned in the roar. And then, silence. When I opened my eyes, the villagers were staring, some in horror, some in awe. The keeper's face was ashen. "You should not have done that," he whispered. I was shaking, every muscle weak, but I managed to speak. "If debt is memory, then I will carry it. But I will not surrender it, not to you, not to him." The villagers did not move. The keeper closed the ledger slowly, as though fearing it might burn in his hands. That night the lessons did not happen. The bell remained silent. The temple doors stayed shut. The village seemed broken, uncertain, as though the pact itself had been fractured. I sat alone, repeating my name under my breath, again and again, afraid that if I stopped, the silence would reclaim it. But each time I said it, I felt stronger. Not safe, never safe, but less erased. I do not know if I paid the debt that night or if I only delayed it. Perhaps by speaking my own name, I bought myself one more day, one more page in this notebook. But I know this: the well is patient, and debts are never truly settled. The morning after my defiance, the village was different. Not louder, not freer, only thinner, as though something vital had been peeled away in the night. The air tasted of damp ash, though no fire had burned. The well stood quiet, but too quiet, the kind of silence that does not rest but waits. The villagers avoided me. Mothers pulled children aside as I passed. Elders turned their faces away. I was not cast out, not harmed, but I was no longer one of them. In their eyes, I had become something worse than an outsider. I had become a risk. The keeper did not summon me again. The temple doors remained shut, its lanterns dark. But on the third evening, I found a bundle waiting outside my door. A pair of shoes neatly knotted. They were mine. I nearly fled that night. My hands shook as I packed my notebook, my pen, the few belongings I still owned. But the road out of the village twisted in my mind. Had I truly walked it once? Could I walk it again? The path seemed a blur, like ink running in water. And beneath that fear lay another. If I left, would the memory follow? Or would I lose it, piece by piece, until I too became like the children returned from the well, alive but hollow? I stayed. On the fifth night, the boy came back, or rather something that wore his shape. I woke to the sound of footsteps outside, soft, uneven, dragging. When I opened the door, he stood there, lantern in hand. His pockmarked cheeks were the same, his eyes the same color, but empty, like windows with the curtains torn away. He did not speak. He only held out the lantern. Its flame burned blue. I stepped back in terror, but he did not follow. He turned and walked toward the well, each step deliberate, the lantern's glow bending the shadows strangely. I followed against all reason, my own feet betraying me. At the well he stopped. He lifted the lantern high, and the light spilled down the stone mouth. For the first time I saw the water below. It did not glisten, it did not ripple. It looked like glass, black and unbroken, reflecting only the lantern's flame. And in that reflection, not my face, but the demon's. No form, no edge, only the suggestion of eyes wide and watching. The boy lowered the lantern. His lips moved soundlessly. And then I understood. The offering was not always shoes, not always memory. Sometimes it was witness, someone to carry the story outward, someone to ensure remembrance stretched beyond the village. That was why I had been allowed to live. That was why my name had not yet been crossed out. The keeper appeared then, his face gaunt, ledger in hand. He placed it on the well's rim, opening to a blank page. "Write," he said. I stared at him. "What?" "You have written all along. You have carried the memory. Now you must give it. Right here, and the debt will pass." The pen in his hand trembled as he offered it. For a moment I considered it. To write would mean survival, perhaps freedom. To let the ledger claim my words, my memories, my witness. But I remembered the foreigner's photographs, the children's shoes, the boy's hollow eyes. To write in that book was not to remember. It was to surrender. I shook my head. "No." The keeper's face twisted in grief, not anger. "Then you doom us all." He pushed the ledger toward me. The wind rose, scattering the pages, faces fluttering in the night air like moths. And from the well came that groan again. "Debt. Debt." I turned away. I do not recall how I reached my room. My body shook with fever, my mind raw with whispers. But when dawn came, I found the ledger outside my door, closed, silent. I did not open it. Instead, I opened my own notebook. I wrote everything, every sound, every dream, every knot, every face. I filled page after page until my hand cramped and the ink bled. Because if memory is the debt, then I will pay it in my way. Not to him, not to the ledger, but to you. Now, as I finish these words, I feel the silence pressing closer. The shoes are gone from my doorway. The villagers have vanished into their houses. The well waits, patient. I do not know if I will leave this place alive. I do not know if by refusing to write in their ledger, I have saved anything at all. But I know this. Someone must carry the story. Someone must remember without surrendering. And if you are reading this, then perhaps the offering has already been made. Not of shoes, not of memory, of you. Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.